good afternoon, morning, evening, wherever you are joining us from. We're honored that you're going to spend about 30 minutes of your day with us. If you are sitting on this webinar, here's what I know. You guys are the hardcore because if you're with us, you are a benefit professional somewhere that's really working your tail off to try to figure out how to lower the cost of health care for your clients. That's not always the most exciting thing. So thank you for what you do and thank you for joining us today. As we sit here today, the PBM, depending on group where you're at, but the PBM is about your first or second largest spend for almost all the health plans out there today. And it's certainly the most inflationary piece of healthcare today. If you go back, 10, 15 years, the PBM spend accounted for, 10, 12% of the health plan spend. Today, it is 25 to 30% of the health plan spend. So it has grown significantly over the last few years. And some of you, if you've been watching the industry, you have noticed that PBMs have been in the news lately. You can't really open any kind of trade association journal or article and you don't see something about PBMs. Last summer, the PBMs made headlines across the country. As the FTC released that study that they did, most of you have seen it. If you haven't seen it, let's just say it was not overly kind to the PBM industry. If you didn't read it, the real Reader's Digest version of it is pretty simple. The FTC looked into PBMs and they essentially came back and said, okay, PBMs are designed to work on behalf of the health plan and the members to to get better negotiated rates for prescription drugs. But the study went in and they found that there's three PBMs that control 80% of the market. Most of us are familiar with that. But because of a real conflict of interest, the PBMs may actually be way more focused on increasing revenue than they are of actually lowering the cost of prescriptions when you show up at your local drugstore. And that's kind of why we're here today to talk about that and what we're doing in that regard. Um, my name is John Farnsley. I'm the Executive Vice President out of the San Antonio division of 90 Degree Benefits. I'm joined by Dean Sterling, who is the President of the Connecticut division of 90 Degree Benefits. And yes, this webinar is being led by the hillbilly from way out in West Texas and the Yankee from way up in northeastern Connecticut. So if nothing else, the different twangs ought to be entertaining for everybody on here. I have had the privilege of working with Dean for the past 5 years, and I can tell you, you will not find anybody in the industry who's more knowledgeable about the PBM world, but probably more importantly, you're not going to find anybody that's more passionate about helping his clients lower the PBM cost. So, Dean, welcome. Thanks for joining me today as we kind of tackle a challenging problem in our industry.
Well, and it is. Thank you, John, and welcome everyone. I want to thank you all for attending today. Navigating the pharmacy benefit can be daunting, given the complexity of the PBM industry, so we'll try to give you something that you can use in your business. I've spent about 30 years working with different pharmacy managers. I believe, like many, that bigger is better, and I learned about 10 years ago that's not always true. We saw an increase in direct-to-consumer marketing that in the 90s fueled new brands and early specialty drugs. Pharmacy is a big business, and I believe it's become a profit center for the insurance company at the expense of their policyholders. What changed my view was the number of acquisitions in the market. PBMs buying delivery channels like specialty to control the delivery of those drugs, or buying independent pharmacies to increase access to those drugs. Costs continued to increase for policyholders as the alignment of interest changed. And at 90, and personally, I believe the alignment of interest matters. So, John, what about these acquisitions?
Well, the last ones to me, I thought were pretty interesting because if you go back to right at the end of 2018, there were two really big acquisitions that occurred. CVS bought Aetna, which again is kind of interesting. The PBM is actually buying the insurance carrier, which sounds odd when you say it. But CVS purchased Aetna at the end of 2018, and Modern Healthcare Magazine came out with an article somewhere in Mayish of 2019, and what they found was CVS Health acquisition resulted in a revenue increase. It went from about 35-ish billion to 61.6 billion. So CVS acquires Aetna and their revenue doubles, which is pretty astounding when you think about it. But And rather that same time period, Cigna was not to be outdone because they were the last. Like they did not own a PBM, or they weren't owned by a PBM, and they didn't want to be left out. So Cigna goes out at that same time frame and they buy ESI. Well, again, Modern Healthcare reported after the end of the first quarter, Cigna's revenue went from 11.4 billion to 37.9 billion. So their revenue tripled with the acquisition. And it just kind of makes the point that I think we all intrinsically know, which is, when these acquisitions happen, what we're always, you could write the headlines. We're always told the same thing. Oh, it's going to create synergies and it's going to help the end user and everybody's going to benefit. What it really does is create revenue for the carriers who are owning PBMs or are owned by PBM. And in that regard, it has worked. That strategy has worked fabulously. To me, if you go look, and we show this slide a lot, if you look at the Fortune 500 top 10 companies by revenue in the United States, and we look at this pretty regularly, it changes a little bit from year to year, but you're always going to see Walmart at the top and Amazon at the top, and Apple's always in there. But it's just really interesting to me that you get down to number 4 and you get down to United Healthcare, and what you'll find is United and CVS and McKesson and Cencora. And if the name Cencora doesn't jump out at you, that used to be AmerisourceBergen. Most of us remember those guys. So it's just AmerisourceBergen was purchased. So these four of the top 10 companies by revenue last year operate as pharmacy supply chain middlemen. They're not producing the drug, they're just in the supply chain to distribute the drug. And then if you go down just a little further, you don't have to go very far. If you go down to number 16 on the list, you get 6 of the top 16 entities are pharmacy supply chain middlemen. And those 3 PBMs that the FTC looked at, ESI, CVS, Optum, control 80% of the market. And then McKesson, Cencora, Cardinal Health control 90% of the market for wholesalers. And again, these aren't the people producing the drugs. These are those supply chain middlemen. 6 of the top 16. The combined revenue of supply chain middlemen is greater than the revenue of Amazon and Walmart. So when you think big business, let that sink in. That's how big the business is. And we talk to people about this all the time. And one of the things that we see, and it makes sense because it's kind of a confusing, the PBM world is a confusing world. And you tell somebody, oh, they're a supply chain middleman, people go, well, I don't even really know what that means. And the best illustration that I've seen is the chart you see in front of you. And it was Eric Bricker, who does, if you're ever looking for really good healthcare videos, I've got no affiliation with Dr. Bricker, but A to Z Healthcare, he does some really, really good educational videos. Dr. Bricker's used this on some videos, and I know he's taken it from some other doctor. I would give him credit. I can't remember who he said he got it from, but this has been around the internet for a while, but I think it's the best depiction of the pharmacy supply chain and what really has to happen. And think about this. You've got a member in a health plan, and there are 6 different layers that revenue has to flow through in order for that script to be delivered. And it's the old adage of just follow the money, right? So if you just look down here at this member box, John's a member of a health plan. Well, John's going to write a check 2 different times, or he's going to pay some cash 2 different times. When I go into the pharmacy, I'm going to pay a copay or a co-insurance or something. And then, of course, a portion of my paycheck is going each month to the health plan. So, the member's paying money to the pharmacy and to the health plan. Over on the other side, there's a plan sponsor, generally the employer, and they're paying the health plan. And of course, they're combining that with the member contribution. And that health plan can be self-funded or fully insured. It doesn't matter. That health plan then pays the PBM, and that PBM then pays the pharmacy, and that pharmacy then pays the wholesaler, and then that wholesaler pays the actual manufacturer of the drug. So when you're looking at the supply chain and the dollars that are involved, it's got this long winding road to get the money from the member and the plan sponsor to the actual manufacturer. That's what the pharmacy supply chain really looks like. And so if you take that and then you just overlay it with the graphs that I showed you before with those the Fortune 100 companies as far as terms of revenue, here's what you find. And this is what the FTC saw when they did this. On the PBM supply chain side, There's three companies that control 80% of the market. Over on the wholesaler side, there's three companies that control 90% of the market. Interestingly to me, there's this deal called the Switch. It's a clearinghouse that operates between the PBM and the pharmacy. And if there are changes in the prescriptions, that's what kind of controls that. And McKesson, who is the largest wholesaler in the country, also controls that switch, which somehow seems odd and not right. But that is the world that we're living in. And so the FTC looked at this and said, man, there's just a handful of companies that are controlling this market. And then they wanted to look at, incentives and who was actually paying who. And what they really found was this, the role of the PBM is to negotiate and lower the cost of drugs for the members and the plan sponsors. But as it turns out, the PBM's got a lot of customers. And, in the simplest term, your customer is whoever's paying you money, right? Everybody on this call probably has a customer and they pay you money. Well, in the PBM space, obviously the health plan pays them money. They may make some money on some spread pricing, but the PBM is getting significant revenue from the pharmaceutical manufacturing companies. And it's in the form of rebates that they may or may not share all or some portion with the health plan, formulary placement fees, market share fees, admin fees, bonuses. They've got all, and they have created a whole cottage industry of new terms for how they actually pay the PBMs. But the FTC looked at this and said, well, wait a minute, if you're negotiating on behalf of the health plan and the plan sponsors and the members, but you're making as much or more money from the manufacturers, how is that really lowering the cost for pharmacy care? And so that's really the problem that we've got to try to solve. And the FTC jumped into it and said, how do we get past that? Indeed, really to a large degree, that's one of the problems that we're trying to figure out. How do you solve the pharmacy problem?
Yeah, yeah, and it's a big problem getting larger. So what have we learned? In a brief period of time, most of the market is controlled by half a dozen companies. There are new specialty drugs releasing to consumers, and most patients don't know the cost of these drugs and may even be getting a manufacturer's coupon to cover their copayment. I mean, you can't watch TV without seeing an ad for something. Um, Looking at the bottom of this slide, though, a point on this slide worth noting, the removal of benefit plan limits. So let's take a look at that. So one of the indirect consequences of the Affordable Care Act was removing plan limits. Lawmakers were not predicting 15 years ago that we would have drug treatments that cost over $1 million, let alone $4 million. It boggles the mind.
Yeah,
So
that's
so
crazy.
so how do we solve this? You know, change the pharmacy manager, exclude certain drugs from coverage, shift more costs to the plan members using higher deductibles and out of pocket. The Affordable Care Act gave us high deductible health plans that lowered the monthly premiums, but they did shift claim costs to the employees. So for most employees, these plans are not affordable, and the most frequently used benefit are prescription drugs. So what
Mhm.
we have now is not sustainable. So,
Yeah.
you know, how do we
Yeah,
solve this?
yeah, because you're right. You sit there and you look at what we've been doing for the past 5 years, and we do it kind of on the medical side too. It's really just we kind of cost shift, maybe don't cover, just change carriers, change PBMs. And in my world, essentially, it seems like we're just kind of shifting the deck chairs on the
Yeah,
Titanic, right? We're not really addressing the root issue. And until you are willing to address the root issue and do something about that, you never solve the problem. And so at 90 Degree Benefits, we've created a PBM optimization program. I know that it's not the first PBM optimization program out there. There are others on the market. But the real concept is to address that root cause and try to actually create a sustainable solution for the pharmacy cost that's kind of spiraled out of control these past few years. So what's a PBM optimization program and what does it look like? Well, in our world, it really has four basic pillars or tenets that really drive the program. And it starts with the power of leverage. There is something to be said for having enough size and scale to negotiate. At 90 Degree Benefits, we leverage our size as one of the top 10 TPAs in the country, owned by one of the most successful blue plans in the country. with the use of an independent third party consulting firm that all they do is PBM work. And so we kind of bring our size, scale, scope, and we use an independent consultant to negotiate contracts and do that on an annual basis because you've got to renew those every single year to help make sure we get the best deal we can on the front end. But then we layer in clinical cost containment programs, some of which have been around for a long time, some of which are new, some of which are kind of market reactions to what's going on today. But having the proper clinical protocols and optimization to make sure that functions well is critical. We then layer in a full suite of alternative funding programs that really are designed to lower the cost for some of the most expensive drugs. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And then lastly, accountability. We plug in a retrospective review. So, every time you enter into one of these programs, you're doing so thinking it's all going to work well, right? That's why you enter into it. But how many times do you actually see the program at the end go back and look and say, okay, we thought it was going to deliver X. Did it really deliver? Did you get the deal? Dean, that's, one of Dean's favorite saying is, hey, did you get the deal? Did you really get the deal that you thought you were going to get when you get to the end of the plan year? So the 90-degree benefit right turn RX pharmacy benefit optimization program really takes these four pillars and builds them in. This is not about any single PBM. We work with a handful of PBMs that go through a lot of things to get embedded into these programs. I'm probably the world's worst about beating up, PBMs, but it's like any industry, right? There's good players and there's maybe some not so good players, and so we're trying to find those good players that are in there to help us put this together. Interestingly, Dean, probably, and I'm not going to go about who they are, but the largest, most well-known PBM optimization program out there, if you go look at their material, what they do is show the first and second pillar. They basically say, hey, we're big, and so we get a good contract with the big three, the three that are maybe debatably causing the problems. And we do a lot of clinical cost containment, but they're not really doing anything on the alternative funding and nothing on the
Right.
accountability. And that's the biggest that we have in the industry. So we ought to go through, Dean, and just kind of talk about in a little more depth. What are these four things that we're doing? We talk about power of leverage and in contracting. What's that
Hmm.
mean?
Yeah, well, let's look at this first pillar. And you mentioned 90 has an independent third party consulting firm that we work with on all matters relating to pharmacies, starting with procurement. So this includes reviewing all documents relating to the pricing that provides insights into claim details, the PBM's practices, the contract definitions, which are very important, clinical programs, and we'll get to that, and formulary drug selection. So the consultant provides continuous vendor oversight to ensure the PBM is compliant with contractual terms. So let's look at the clinical programs. So there are several ways to control costs, but I think the first two are important: step therapy and prior authorization. We are adopting step therapy for the new biosimilars to Humira and Stelara. Humira costs about $7,000 a script, but the biosimilars are about $1,000 a script. Stelara is much more expensive at about $27,000 a script, but the biosimilar is less than 6,000. These are significant savings for the plan sponsor and our stop loss carriers. So when we look at in the days where you had a generic before a brand, this is what we're doing right now on our step therapy programs with the biosimilars, and that's going to be impactful for our clients. Prior authorization can also be impactful, and we have an example on that. So this is a client. We took a new client and found a member taking an expensive drug for multiple sclerosis. We were notified by the PBM that the drug was going to be approved. We asked the PBM if there were any alternatives, and they said there may be a generic since the original drug patent had expired. This PBM doesn't own their specialty pharmacy, and they researched a few channels. The PBM was able to source the exact same drug through a specialty pharmacy. It was a chemical match to the brand with a much lower cost, much lower cost. Turns out, patient had no idea how expensive the script was, but wanted the brand because he had a coupon from the manufacturer. We see that a lot. We told him the new script would be at no cost to make him happy. About a week later, I got a call from the CFO. Did you just save me $100,000? Yes, we did. And
that's a good
now,
day at the office when you
it
can
was a
save
great
100
day
grand
in
on
the office.
membership.
Now,
Yeah.
I can tell you, we set this up now in with our pharmacy manager, and no additional drugs for the Tecfidera ever came through. So
Huh.
everything got pushed to generic. But and this doesn't happen every day, but it happens every other month or so. So we are finding those savings. Let's go to the next slide. So the GLP-1s, John, this is a hot topic,
Yeah.
really hot. Helping employees to control weight could keep them healthier, and obesity does contribute to greater healthcare cost. That's been documented. But what about the cost? Most of our clients are not covering the GLP-1s right now for weight loss, but they're covering them for type 2 diabetes. Okay, that's important. And the tide's going to turn, but these are expensive and it's a long-term commitment. So, what about the health plans that are covering the GLP-1s? It may be great for member satisfaction, but it will have an impact on claims. And I think the jury is still out on how many plans are going to want to continue to cover them or whether they will start covering them. But right now, we're covering the GLP-1s only for an indication of diabetes. So let me finish our clinical program. I want to finish this kind of program with another prior authorization. We've had several new groups come to us that didn't cover GLP-1s for weight loss. Yet we are finding that the prior administrator was not policing the benefit very well, and members were getting the drug without an indication of diabetes. Our PBMs require the clinicals from the prescriber to validate diabetes before approving and dispensing the drug. John, what do you think? This is a hot topic.
Yeah, no, there's got to be a strategy for the GLP. It's probably the first or second biggest hot button in our industry right now. And again, there's a webinar every other day about what do you do with GLP-1s. And essentially, I mean, kind of like the article that we looked at from Blue Cross Blue Shield Massachusetts. If you're just covering them for everything, you can do it. There's a significant cost involved in that, and I think people are realizing what that
Yeah.
is. So there are different strategies for the GLP-1s, as you said. Our strategy really revolves more around focusing that on its intent, diabetes, not the obesity. We're willing to do some different things, but you really have to have a good strategy because the GLP-1 is such a big part of the spend. And Dean, I'd shared
Yeah.
with you, I was at a PBM conference about 3 years ago, and one of the speakers there who was really good made the point that at that point in time, Humira was the best-selling drug of all time. He was showing the numbers. I can't remember them. They were astronomical numbers as far as sales
Yep.
and revenue. And he made the point then he said, and these GLP-1s are going to blow past Humira. And I thought, that's insane. There's no way that'll happen. Well, you fast forward 3 years, he was dead right. GLP-1s had blown past everything in the market.
Yeah.
And it's not going away. This issue is there. So you've got to have a strategy that involves something with the GLP-1s to get those under control, and we bring a strategy to bear that we know will work. Of course, the other big spend, Dean, is the specialty drug spend. Um, Today, most plans, 50% of your plan spend is going to be specialty drug spend. And if you're asking me for a definition of specialty drug, I don't think there is a universal one. They're the really expensive drugs that are in the marketplace today. I'll generally tell people that I promise you, if you see a drug advertised on a Sunday afternoon during a golf tournament, that is a specialty drug. That's the definition of specialty drug. And they're great drugs. These things have, from a quality of
Yep.
life, it's phenomenal what we've been able to do to help
Life
people,
changers.
but they
Yeah.
come with such a huge price tag. I mean, there's generally 50% of your pharmacy spends on the specialty side, and that's 2 to 3% of your population. It's a small number of people. And we've been dealing with that 80/20 and all that stuff for many years. But you've got to have a strategy for it. And what we do is layer in a full suite of alternative pathways from alternative funding, the PAP programs, the MAP programs, 340B, international, really with the goal of just getting to the lowest net cost on a drug. If you go back 5 years, patient assistance programs were all the rage. That was the big new thing, and they're still there. A lot of the manufacturers have pushed back on that, so it's not as prevalent as it was. But still, there's huge opportunities in the marketplace to get free drugs, these very expensive drugs, absolutely free through these PAP programs. So it's really valuable to have that included in your strategy. But then We layer in international, and international drugs, gosh, kind of has flipped. If you go back 10 years ago, I think mentally we had this vision of somebody shipping in some drug from Uzbekistan or somewhere that we've never heard of. Today, it's really, I won't say it's completely accepted, but most of the groups that we work with, bringing drugs in from Canada and Europe and different places, very accepted, and significant savings that come through that international drug sourcing pathway.
Right.
So, whether it's alternative funding, the coupon programs, 340B programs, international programs, you need a full suite of alternative pathways built into your PBM strategy. And of
Yeah.
course, the other one, Dean, and probably the hard one, is the side of care, right? You get into the infusion drugs that oftentimes don't go through the PBM. They are a pharmacy, but they're not flowing through the PBM. They're flowing through the medical side of the equation.
Right.
And it's huge, huge dollars, big dollars for a health plan. And you got to have a plan for how you're going to handle that and what you're going to do with it. There was an article, and this was not mine. I stole it shamelessly from our friends over at Lavinity. They use this a lot in one of their presentations, but I thought it was really interesting. There was a study of 400,000 patients, and really what they found was with this large group of patients, the hospital markup was about 300% on these infusion drugs. So you have to put a program together to help with the infusion. And I will tell you right now, there's again no silver bullet. We could do a whole presentation about brown bag and white bag and all the stuff that goes
Yeah.
with it. But you need some solution that you feel comfortable with because today the hospitals are earning more from their markups than the manufacturers are for these drugs. So full circle, you've got to get the right contract on the front end. You've got to embed the proper clinical protocols. You have to have a full suite of these alternative funding pathways to help get to the lowest net cost. But then when you do that, you got to go back and make sure everything you thought you were doing is actually working the way that you intended it to work. And this is, Dean's been on this since the day I met him.
That's true. And I think it is one of the most important pieces because on paper everything looks great, but you really have to make sure that the PBM is performing. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time because we did talk a little bit about this earlier, but monitoring the PBM is important basically to ensure the PBM is performing. And that includes plan setup, all the pharmacy claims to ensure the pricing and those guarantees are accurate and that they're achieving contractual obligations. So this validation is important for us as a third party administrator, but it's really important to be able to share with our clients and advisors so that they know that the PBM is performing and it's a very, very complex setup. So, uh, John, what have we learned?
All right, you put all these together. What's it mean, Dean? If you can put these four pillars together, what's that mean?
Yeah. Okay. So with pharmacy, pharmacy spend increasing at double digits, I think now more than ever you need a plan and a partner that will do the heavy lifting. We have clients with a generic fill rate of 95%, and the specialty spend is less than 20%. You mentioned earlier 50%. Well, we've got clients that have a specialty spend less than 20% of the pharmacy costs. So we believe our programs with the right PBM can make a difference. And it really is, you know, active pharmacy management. It's looking at all of these different components, all these different pieces, and making sure that we're managing those so that we can remove the waste and lower the cost.
Yeah. And I think that last bullet, Dean, is probably the most important. Alignment of interest.
Yes.
We work with a handful of PBMs. They're the transparent PBMs that where all the revenue streams are to align everybody's interest. And it really all rolls back to the simplest form of how do you get to the lowest net cost on these really
Right.
expensive drugs? We want to get people the drugs they need, but we need to do it at the lowest net cost. And so today, there is a webinar. There's probably one coming up 30 minutes from now on pharmacy expense. It's just such a
Okay.
big topic. There's a lot of them out there. There's a lot of strategies. This certainly is not the only strategy in the marketplace. I think it's one of the most comprehensive strategies. Pharmacy spend is not easy. It's a tough one to tackle, but the dollars are so big you have to tackle it. So we're not here to tell you the strategy that you have to use. We think this is a good strategy to consider. In the marketplace today, there's one strategy that won't work, and there's only one: hope. If you're sitting there today and your group's got a 60% pharmacy spend, 50% pharmacy spend, and you're just going, man, I hope this thing turns around next year. I hope it gets better. That's not a great strategy to have. If you've got some groups in that space, we'd encourage you to reach out to us. We'd love to talk one on one about, okay, how can we take this program and create meaningful change for your groups
Yeah.
that's going to help them get the right drugs, right cost, lowest net cost, etc. So I hope some of this information is valuable for you. We know you guys are the hardcore. You're spending the middle of your lunch hour listening to people talk about pharmacy, so we appreciate you being on there. 90 Degree Benefits is really committed to this. We believe the core values you see on the screen, they're not just talking points. Dean, we go to every meeting, we talk about these at every meeting.
You
It's
do.
important to us. These are what we try to live. And it's no coincidence that customer first is first on the list, right?
Right.
That's what drives everything that we do. That's why we have these conversations about the pharmacy spend. How do we do more? How do we do better for that end user, for that member that's out there trying to get a
Right.
script?
Right. Yeah, I agree. And I loved going through this whole webinar with you, John. I think you did a great job
Thanks.
with some of the talking points. Particularly impressed with, and I hadn't really seen in a while, how powerful or and how much revenue these this handful of companies that are basically dispensing and controlling the prescription drug benefit, how much power that they actually have.
Yeah.
So, but thanks to you, and I appreciate you inviting me on, as a guest to this webinar. That I know that somebody volunteered you, and then you said, well, I need to get Dean on this. So happy to have spent some time with you today too. So I want to
Right.
thank everybody who attended our webinar, and thank Mr. Farnsley for kind of chairing this thing.
We ran right up against it on time. There's some questions that came in rather than just told people we're going to email back questions. If you have any other questions or you just want to talk through this in greater detail, feel free to reach out to Dean, myself, or anybody, any of your sales guys within 90 Degree Benefits. They'll all be familiar with this. So reach out, talk to them, find out about the strategy, and find out if it might be a fit for you and some of the groups that you're working with that have some of those really high costs for drug costs. So thanks everybody for your time. We appreciate you joining. We look forward to talking more to you, with you in the future. Thanks.